Okay, let's unpack this. We're beginning a deep dive into a profoundly disturbing and exceptionally rare case. The 2025 double homicide of Dr. Spencer Tepe and his wife, Monique, inside their home in Columbus, Ohio.
This is a tragedy that has just baffled investigators and security analysts, and our mission today is to really get past the headlines and analyze the source material, the timeline, who the victims were, and most critically, the specific forensic anomalies that make this crime, well, something else entirely. We're talking about a respected, highly educated couple shot to death in their own home in the Wineland Park neighborhood.
Right, on the 1400 block of N 4th Street. And the puzzle, it starts right away. Because when police finally get inside, they're hit with these two huge contradictions. You have the bodies of Spencer, who was 37, and Monique, 39, both with gunshot wounds. But there's absolutely no weapon at the scene. And maybe even stranger, zero evidence of forced entry. That just immediately sets the stage for a massive forensic and behavioral mystery.
It truly does. And when you look at the profiles of Spencer and Monique, the violence makes even less sense. Spencer Tippie was this really respected dentist, an Ohio State grad. He worked at Athens Dental Depot, had also worked in Ashland before that. And Monique, she had a background in childhood education. Everyone who knew her described her as a, quote, loving, patient, and joyful mother.
They were really embedded in their community. They got married in 2021, so they were just a month away from their 5-year anniversary. And the sources all stress this. They were completely devoted parents. Family and service, that was their focus. So when a couple like this, high status, is killed in such a calculated way, the question of why just explodes.
And the alarm wasn't raised by, a gunshot or a neighbor screaming. It was raised by silence. The whole critical timeline kicks off on Tuesday morning, December 30th, 2025, when Dr. Spencer Tepe just doesn't show up for work.
That's the first crack in the facade, isn't it? Missing that professional obligation.
Exactly. Dr. Mark Valrose, who owned Athens Dental Depot, he's the one who made the first 911 call. And the concern was immediate because, as Valrose told the dispatcher, Tepe was, and I quote, always on time. But the real alarm bell for him was not being able to reach his wife, Monique. That's when he knew something was deeply wrong.
So the police go out, they do the initial welfare check.
Right. 9:22 a.m., an officer goes to the house, knocks, no answer. But the situation escalates really fast because his colleagues and friends, I think they were just getting this growing sense of dread. They decide to drive to the home themselves.
And this is where it just becomes, it's so hard to even process the horror those friends walked into.
It's unimaginable. Around 9:56 a.m., one of those friends calls 911 again. You can hear the panic in the recording. He says, I can hear kids inside, and I think I heard one yell, but we can't get in. Just think about that for a second. You hear the children, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, but the door is locked. The parents aren't answering.
And the final confirmation, the worst possible news, came just minutes later.
Yes. At about 10:03 a.m., someone finally gets into the house, and an audibly distressed man calls emergency services and just says, there's a body. Both victims were pronounced dead by medics at 10:11 a.m. The whole thing, from that first call to the declaration of death, it was less than an hour. But it uncovered a crime that just defies all the standard categories.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is the point of, critical divergence for investigators. It's where the sources start hammering home this exceptionally rare label for the case. Analysts, like CNN's Juliette Kayyem, they immediately focused on what she called the 3 key anomalies.
Yeah, and let's break those down, because they say so much about the killer's mindset. The first is the modus operandi itself. Spencer Tepe had multiple gunshot wounds. Both victims were shot. So this suggests a really rapid, brutal, and targeted act.
And the second anomaly, which we mentioned, no gun recovered and no forced entry. That's just a nightmare for anyone trying to classify the crime.
And then the third, which is, it's the most psychologically chilling part of this whole thing. The fact that their 2 young children, ages 4 and 1, were found inside the house, completely unharmed. You take those 3 things together, and it instantly throws out the simplest explanation.
The police could immediately rule out murder-suicide. The missing gun is the simple part, right? The killer took the weapon. But if you dig deeper, it tells you something much more complex is happening psychologically, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Look, a murder-suicide is often a crime of total psychological collapse. It's rage, it's messy, the weapon is usually left behind. And tragically, the violence can, and often does, extend to the entire family. But the fact that the killer here
It suggests the violence was extremely targeted, focused only on the adults. tells you the killer was organized, controlled, and had a very specific purpose.
Precisely. Now, if we look at general criminology, about 40% of homicides involve a gunshot, so the weapon type itself isn't unusual. And the victims, Spencer and Monique, being a higher socioeconomic status couple in an urban area, that also aligns with some crime stats.
That's the deviations, the things that don't fit that really matter here. Like, most homicides happen in the evening, maybe 40% of them. But this happens sometime before 9 a.m. Does that suggest a planned meeting? Or maybe an ambush tied to their morning routine?
It certainly pulls the time frame away from a spontaneous late-night thing. The timing itself is a clue towards calculation. But the biggest contradiction is the lack of forced entry right next to this extreme violence. In a typical home invasion that goes wrong, you expect a busted door, a broken window, signs of a struggle, maybe the house is tossed.
But here, the entry was clean. That screams familiarity, or trust. Maybe the couple either knew their killer, or the killer used some kind of very effective trick to get inside.
And that's exactly why analysts like Kayem are calling this exceptionally rare. You've got a clean entry and exit, which you'd associate with a professional calculated hit. But then you have this incredible violence, suggesting a deep personal grievance. That paradox is what detectives have to somehow figure out.
Which leads us right into the two main scenarios that analysts think are most likely. It's either a random stranger at the door who just happens to kill this couple, or some narrative that might explain why they were targeted.
And while, law enforcement has to look at both, all the evidence really pushes the balance heavily toward the targeted scenario. The lack of evidence, no forced entry, no signs of a robbery is often just as important as the evidence you do find.
So if we assume it was targeted, the whole investigation shifts, right?
Yeah.
It goes from looking for external factors to looking inward into the victims' lives. This is where victimology comes in. For our listeners, what does that really mean in a case like this?
That's a great question. Victimology, basically, is the deep, granular study of the victims' lives. You're trying to see if their personal, professional, or financial history created a motive or a list of potential suspects. Detectives aren't just looking at ballistics. They're diving into who knew Spencer and Monique, who knew their routine, who might have held a grudge, who stood to gain from them being gone.
So you're talking about looking at professional grievances, maybe from Spencer's dental practice or their financial records, or any past disputes that might have seemed small at the time.
Absolutely. Was there a rivalry at his work, Athens Dental Depot, or his old practice? Were there business deals we don't know about? Or was there some deep-seated conflict with an acquaintance that was totally hidden from public view? The investigation has to find the why that would justify such calculated violence inside a home someone had to be let into.
But if it was a targeted hit, why the multiple gunshot wounds? Doesn't that kind of extreme violence usually point to, emotion and rage? It almost seems to contradict the clean entry and the control the killer showed.
That is the central conflict in the evidence. It's the whole puzzle. It suggests that while the execution was planned, the smooth entry, taking the weapon, the act itself was driven by just extreme hatred or revenge or maybe fear. The killer was organized enough to get in and out clean, but motivated enough to use maximum focused violence on the couple. That combination of calculation and brutality is what makes this so disturbing.
And all through this, the killer made a very deliberate choice about the children. We can't really analyze this without keep coming back to that profound behavioral signature.
It's the key. It's the key to understanding the killer's self-imposed rules. The decision to leave a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old completely unharmed is a conscious choice. It tells you the motive wasn't about wiping out the whole family, which can happen in emotionally driven domestic violence. No, this suggests the motive was solely about eliminating the parents for revenge or money or something entirely specific to Spencer and Monique.
The family statement even said their lives were filled with love, joy, and yet this ultimate paradox remains. A high-status couple killed in a calculated way that points to trust, but with a motive that's just completely hidden.
It's the sheer complexity of it. The contradictions are why you have national analysts weighing in. This isn't a simple case with a clear pattern.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? And what is the call to action from the Columbus police?
Well, the investigation, which is being led by Detectives Weiner and Miller, is leaning heavily on the community. They're working on the assumption that the killer had to get into and out of that neighborhood during a very specific window of time, and someone or some camera saw them.
They're specifically asking for surveillance video, photos, any kind of digital evidence of suspicious people or cars in the Wineland Park area. And the time frame is really tight, between midnight and 9 a.m. on Tuesday, December 30th.
And listen to these boundaries because they're very specific. The area they're interested in is bordered by Summit Street on the east, North Grand Avenue on the west, East 7th Avenue to the south, and East 11th Avenue to the north. If you have a ring camera, a security system, if you saw anything unusual, no matter how small you think it is, it's crucial you contact the homicide unit at 614-645-4730, or, if you want to be anonymous, Crime Stoppers at 614-461-TIP-PS.
This tragedy just devastated a family, a community. The police need every piece of information they can get.
And as we end this deep dive, just think about that psychological element we kept coming back to. A killer capable of such extreme focused violence against the parents, but who made an intentional cognitive decision to spare the 1-year-old and the 4-year-old. That choice, that's a behavioral signature. It may someday provide the answer. It forces us to ask. What motivation was so powerful it justified a clean, brutal execution, but also carried a line the killer would not cross? That question about the killer's internal code remains the most haunting piece of the Wineland Park homicides.